the fact that the homicide rate dropped dramatically after she was arrested.
She was part of this web that went right to the top of Guatemala's political as well as criminal elite. She was absolutely right in the eye of the storm. I mean, I was told she was sending out hits on people. I was told her brothers would kidnap young women, take them up to their mansion, them, pass them around the security guards.
Too often we hear of ruthless, violent men at the top of the world's worst criminal organizations. But rest assured, there are women just as brutal, if not worse.
There is a tendency for women to be more violent than men, so that the men who are around them will take them seriously.
This is the sad reality of the criminal world. Women are seen as either partners or victims of ruthless men. So if a woman wants to join the cartel, she has to be extra tough to prove her worth and make men respect her. This leads to monsters. Let's explore the most brutal female narcos in history. Women who have committed crimes so heinous, they even shock their male counterparts. Claudia Ochoa Felix. Claudia Ochoa Felix wanted the world to know she was El Chapo's lead assassin. Her flashy clothes and huge firearms were proudly displayed in all her social media posts. Claudia was born on January 15, 1984 in Sinaloa, Mexico. This region is the headquarters of El Chapo's famous Sinaloa cartel, and Claudia didn't waste much time before she joined his ranks. But by the time she was 30, she was known as the Empress of Anthrax. She was the leader of the assassin group. But perhaps what makes her stand out from the crowd was that all this time, Claudia was a model too. In 2013, she became an internet celebrity when she started sharing posts of her jet setting or inside her lavish home, proudly showing off her artillery guns, luxury clothes, and jewelry. Then she came into the spotlight again after she was romantically involved with Jose Rodrigo Arachiga Gamboa, aka El Chino Anthrax. El Chino commandeered and founded Los Anthrax. Some people already had their suspicions about Claudia. After all, who has this many weapons in their home, and who can afford this many luxury clothes? Now Claudia's fans were pretty certain she was working for the Sinaloa cartel. Of course, she was. However, when the authorities started questioning her about it, she strongly denied any claims. But Claudia never ceased to flaunt her riches on social media. She was even known as the Kim Kardashian of the Sinaloa cartel. It was like Claudia didn't believe the police could ever catch up with her. And in a strange and ironic twist, they never did. On September 14, 2019, a man called the authorities. He had woken up next to Claudia, and she was unresponsive. Normally, cartel assassins end up in prison or assassinated themselves, but Claudia died of a drug overdose. Tracking her social media activity, the police found her last post enjoying a meal at a seafood restaurant before going out to party. Sinaloa State Attorney General Juan Jose Rios Astavillo commented, "Forensic examiners made an analysis of the various substances this person consumed and they tested positive. All of this compromised her organs, which caused the death. But what we can assure is that the death specifically derived from a non-violent cause. A rare but ultimately an end for a controversial female narco." Sandra Avia Beltran. Today she's a TikTok queen, but back in the day she was the brutal queen of the Pacific. Yep, it's time to learn about the infamous Sandra Avia Beltran. Sandra didn't really have a chance at a normal legal life. She was born on October 11th, 1960, into the Sinaloa cartel. Her family were notorious heroin smugglers. Her father, Alfonso Avia Quintero, was the brother of Guadalajara cartel leader Rafael Caro Quintero. Rafael Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo were the founders of Mexico's first modern-day cartel, the Guadalajara. This is the same cartel El Chapo and El Mayo worked for before the Sinaloa even existed. In fact, the Sinaloa cartel started out as a tiny plaza of the Guadalajara, so little Sandra's childhood was filled with ruthless narcos flaunting blood money and threatening each other into submission. Sandra also learned that Mexico is seriously corrupted, and that if you wanted to make the big bucks, you had to exploit this side.
Pero no es nomás con el narcotráfico, hay mucha corrupción en cualquier ámbito social. Comercio, empresas, tráfico de influencias con el narcotráfico, con indocumentados, en todo.
According to her father, they had no choice but to join the drug trafficking and racketeering business. In a place where corruption was normalized, he acted as though he was a victim of the system. Aside from a warped view of reality, Sandra was also exposed to unspeakable violence. She was only 13 when she witnessed her first shootout. This was a traumatizing event, but for her, she was already involved in her family's cartel. She worked as her father's money counter. Cartel dads are not exactly ideal parents. Sandra's dad gave her private tuition, piano, and dance lessons, and trips to Disneyland on a regular basis. But he also exposed her to violence, made her participate in it, and left her prone to assassination attempts. She was still a teenager when someone tried to kill her.
Narcos y yo, de un momento se atravesó un carro, nos cerró el paso y se bajaron dos personas armadas. Se nos pusieron de frente y inició el tiroteo. La persona que me iba siguiendo armada trató de salir corriendo para que no lo tuvieran y lo detienen cuando él trata de salir. Es como yo me salvo y alcancé a ver a Joel tirado.
Imagine losing your boyfriend this way, but to Sandra, this was normal. People walked the streets with pistols at the waist, with musicians walking and playing behind them. At dawn, you heard the music, the shootouts. It was when they killed the people. In her late teens, Sandra enrolled at the prestigious University of Guadalajara to study journalism. She kept to herself and got excellent grades. Her college mates remember her being quiet, withdrawn, and suspicious of other people. This might not be surprising considering what she had already been through. Sandra could have chosen a career in the legal world, but instead, she put her newfound skills to good use in the cartel world. She became a master money launderer. Around the same time, Sandra entered the highest echelons of Mexico's drug world. When she was 21, she started dating Armando Carrillo Fuentes, the boss of the Juarez cartel. Then, she became a prominent figure in the Sinaloa cartel, overseeing illegal substance shipments to the US. Her relationship with Armando didn't last long, but she would have many more, and her two marriages would be more tactical than romantic. Both her husbands were ex-police commanders turned traffickers. With their expertise, Sandra could evade arrest and become a better smuggler. Ironically, both her husbands were stabbed to death by hired assassins. Another one of her rumored lovers was El Chapo himself. No one knows just how romantic their relationship was, but one thing's for certain, they were once very close, and Sandra was head of public relations for the Sinaloa cartel. Then Sandra had yet another tumultuous affair. Juan Diego Espinoza Ramirez, also called the Tiger. Tiger had strong ties to the Norte de Valle cartel in Colombia. This was just the open door she needed. Through Sandra, Colombian and Mexican cartels were now united, and she was making more money for the Sinaloa than ever before. According to The Guardian, Sandra had a habit of carrying suitcases with millions of dollars in $100 bills. By the end of the 20th century, Sandra had a fleet of private jets, several mansions, and constant invitations to VIP parties, many of which became crime scenes after her attendance. Once, she bribed the Mexican president with $100 million. The most I ever heard about was a $100 million bribe to a Mexican president. $1 million is nothing. I've seen one politician look into the bag to see if it was all there. He knew everything. For Sandra, her climbing up the cartel ranks and enjoying a varied, romantic life were manifestations of female empowerment in the misogynistic cartel world. Women in this world are abused, discarded, and tossed out with little more concern than a child abandoning a Barbie doll. Narco leaders would keep a harem of up to 10 women, and this sexual freedom does not exist to their female counterparts. Women are looked at as objects, adornments, or unnecessary, but never as a fighting being, or a person made of triumphs and achievements. Her career triumph and the gold pendant on her neck carrying 228 diamonds was a middle finger to all the men who thought women can't make it in the narco world. As cool as that might sound, she still killed people to get to the top, and the police were on her tail. In 2002, Sandra's son was kidnapped and she paid a $5 million ransom to get him back. Clearly, whoever kidnapped her son knew she was filthy rich. Then there was an incident that earned her her famous nickname. In 2001, the United States seized a tuna fishing boat transporting 9 tons of white powder. Imagine how many more actually came into the country before the DEA finally caught on to them. This is what earned Sandra her nickname, the Queen of the Pacific, and that's when the police declared her one of Mexico's most wanted and got a warrant out for her arrest. Sandra lived on the run for 5 years.
No descansas. Estás cambiándote constantemente de ciudad, de casa. No puedes tener amistades, no puedes ver a tu familia. Es agobiante.
Finally, in 2007, she was arrested, but she behaved like a proud queen more than a caught criminal. In fact, she asked the police to give her a few minutes to do her hair and put on her makeup before they filmed her.
¿Tu nombre, por favor?
Sandra, Avia, Beltran.
¿De dónde es originaria?
Tijuana, Baja California.
When the officer asked her what business she was in, she said clothing. Even when she was convicted and sent to prison for life, she remained adamant that she shouldn't be there. For much of the next decade, she lived behind bars, but in style, While other prisoners had visits in a common room, Avia's guests were escorted to her cell, where her 3 maids served food, alcohol, and cigarettes. Jose Gerardo Mejia was the first journalist to interview her in prison, described Avia as a prisoner in 4-inch heels adorned with jewels, custom clothing, and obsequious guards who acted with the airs of a low-ranking diplomat announcing the arrival of the ambassador. When she was denied restaurant-made food, Sandra claimed her basic rights were being violated. She never seemed to own up to her crimes or accept a more modest life. In 2012, she was extradited to the US and named a key link in the cocaine conspiracy. Finally, she pled guilty and got a 70-month sentence. Sandra ended up spending 2 years in solitary confinement for bad behavior, a small slap on the wrist reminding her money doesn't get you anything. In 2015, she was released and now living in Guadalajara. Inside the front door of Sandra Avia Beltran's home is an altar and lit candles that form a crowded shrine to her first husband, riddled by gunfire, her second husband, through the heart, and her brother, tortured to death. Sandra lost most of her money and assets, including 15 homes, 30 sports cars, and 300 jewels. However, she's not done with being the center of attention.
Hola, buenas noches. Muchas gracias por todas las personas que me han tenido interés en mi página. Esta es la oficial.
Yep, in 2003, Sandra Avia Beltran became a TikTok celebrity. She posts skincare routines and videos of herself rambling about the glorious days of the cartel life. Sandra has almost 300,000 followers on TikTok. She might want to use her internet fame to recover some of her money. However, her lack of remorse over her actions or general cartel bloodshed does not sit well with most people. Marlori Jacon Roselle. Let's fly down to Guatemala for this one. Marlori Jacon Roselle was born in Guatemala City, the capital of Guatemala, on October 4th, 1972. The first thing that became clear about Marlori was that she was very smart.
I spoke to a former DEA agent and he said that had Marjorie been in the legal world, she could have reached CEO position in some big company.
However, she chose the drug trade instead. Marlori was never interested in the legal world. It's unclear whether her family had any ties to the Guatemalan cartels or whether she chose this path on her own. But Marlori was pretty young when she decided she was going to make the big bucks in the criminal underworld. After finishing high school, she enrolled in a university to study psychology, but after a few years, she dropped out and pursued the narcotics trade instead. She soon became one of Guatemala's top money launderers. Then, she became one of Central America's top money launderers. According to the DEA, she was once cleaning $10 million every month. She was doing a lot of this for the big Mexican cartels. The US Treasury said, the drug trafficking activities and her ties to the Mexican drug cartels make her a critical figure in the narcotics trade. And you know how it is in the South American cartels. To climb to the top, you have to be extra ruthless. First, there was Marlori's first drug deal. In April 2004, she had promised to move a ton of coke to Colombia through Honduras. It was an $8 million deal, but Marlori's first buyer had pulled out. So she secured a new deal with Eliu Lorenzana, a powerful drug boss. Soon enough, she had a network full of drug bosses and ruthless criminal business people. Then came Los Patronas, a network of female narcos bosses in Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador. These weren't just business-savvy women who laid low and laundered money for their male colleagues.
I mean, I was told she was sending out hits on people. I was told her brothers would kidnap young women, take them up to their mansion, rape them, pass them around the security guards.
And Marlori wasn't an innocent bystander either. She might have used her feminine charms to secure several deals with cartel men, but before anything, she intimidated people with the many security guards that always surrounded her. Juan, a former cartel member, recalls, she was a woman with a big presence and very intimidating because of the kind of people she was surrounded by and the amount of people. She moved with security everywhere. There was always someone at the door. But Marlori didn't just buy the security guards herself, because by now, she had ties to the top dogs in the Guatemalan government. This is how she earned her nickname, the Queen of the South. Yep, this is who the Netflix series is inspired by. Marlori had befriended people with very high functions in the government.
She was part of this web that went right to the top of Guatemala's political as well as criminal elite. She was absolutely right in the eye of the storm.
That's why she felt invincible. She and her business were protected by the government itself. Marlori was guarded by the National Police. She had 3 or 4 cars with her from the Ministry of the Interior. It was security that was assigned to her. Marlori was particularly close to Guatemala's Interior Minister, Mauricio Lopez Bonilla. No one knows exactly how close they were, that is to say, if they were ever involved romantically, they were best buds, or simply tied through lust for money and power. But at one point in 2013, there were reports of Bonilla visiting Marlori at home. He was the one who greenlit Marlori's all-around-the-clock protection as she moved from town to town, securing high-end narcotics deals. The security guards ordered by Bonilla even protected Marlori's many traffickers. He was officially keeping the cartel safe. Marlori was also friends with Roxana Baldetti, Guatemala's vice president. It was easy to see why she felt invincible. She could do anything she liked with official protection from the government. But much like her Mexican counterparts, the Queen of the South got in trouble when she started shipping to the US. Around the mid-2010s, the DEA became interested in her. This is where Marlori did something unexpected.
Marjorie was incredibly valuable to the DEA. And when they sanctioned her, she realized that if she wanted to stay out of prison for the rest of her life, she was going to have to cooperate substantially.
That's right. Marlori didn't fight for her cartel. In fact, she decided that if she was going down, she was going to take the whole cartel down with her. Marlori didn't even wait to be arrested by the DEA. As soon as they made contact, she flipped. She said she was going to help them take down her entire Guatemalan cartel and indict the corrupt ones at the top. Mauricio Lopez Bonilla and Roxana Baldetti were amongst the first ones arrested by the U.S. authorities.
Los testimonios de Jacon sirvieron para encauzar y condenar a varios acusados de narcotráfico y lavado de dinero, incluidos los empresarios Lorenzana de Guatemala.
Do you remember Eliu Lorenzana? He was the first drug boss Marlori went into business with. This is how ruthless she was. She was giving the DEA every single name she'd ever worked with. Why? On the one hand, she wanted to make sure no one would come after her. On the other hand, she wanted to ensure her freedom, as she knew she was facing serious prison time. Roxana Baldetti and Mauricio Lopez Bonilla were both sentenced to prison in Guatemala on corruption charges. When their terms are over, they will most likely be extradited to the US to face drug charges. This means more prison time for both of them. Interestingly, Bonilla was once the most important security contact for the United States in Guatemala on security and counter narcotics. This is pretty shocking that he was protecting Marlori at the same time. But what's truly shocking is Marlori's prison sentence. In 2014, she was facing 26 years in prison on several charges including trafficking and money laundering. She was supposed to serve this many years in a Miami federal prison. The next year, she received a reduced sentence of 12 years, and in 2019, Marlori was free on bail. Wait, what? Yep. She was freed after spending less than 5 years in prison. This goes to show just how much ratting on your former allies can reduce your sentence. Marlori Jacon's case is a perfect example of how women can become even more ruthless than men to be taken seriously.
There is a tendency for women to be more violent than men so that the men who are around them will take them seriously.
During her trial, the Lorenzana brothers were openly mocking her and interrupting her testimonies. Her only revenge was testifying against them and sending them to prison. But as long as women are seen as partners, victims, or innocent bystanders of their husbands' crimes, they will only become more violent in the hope to prove themselves. Our next female narco is the ultimate example of this case. La China. La China was so brutal, she scared her own boyfriend into ratting her out to the cops. Melissa Calderon was born on August 12, 1948 in Mexico. By the time she was 20, she knew she wanted to be a cartel leader and nothing else. Nothing else is known about her childhood, but it's safe to say it was a rough one considering Melissa's taste for blood. In 2005, Melissa took the name La China and joined the Damaso cartel, a subdivision of the notorious Sinaloa cartel. She was ruthless and ambitious, and she didn't care that most of the criminals around her were men. She could be just as aggressive, if not more. In 2008, La China was commander of the Damaso cartel armed unit. And while she was commander, the rate of crime in the area went up several times. She had a thirst for blood that was shocking even to the most violent criminals in her gang.
Calderon Ojeda is blamed for the outbreak of violence in the resort area, which government officials believe are responsible for a number of murders and other violent crimes that stems from a turf war between rival gangs in La Paz, according to Fox News Latina.
She would kill cops, kidnap people for extortion, and dismember enemies from rival gangs. She would leave parts of their bloody bodies on their family's doorstep. La China and her unit were responsible for at least 178 deaths. Whenever her men would have a successful mission, leaving bodies behind, that is, she would reward them with big bags of white powder. Needless to say, Melissa was surrounded by violent men. In 2014, Damaso's then leader, El Grande, killed La China's boyfriend, Eric. This was a power play. El Grande wanted to let La China know her commanding days were over. But this wasn't a wake-up call for Melissa. In fact, she was enraged beyond her already frightening level. She swore revenge on El Grande and proceeded to leave even more victims behind. Melissa rallied 300 cartel soldiers to her side and started her own cartel, Las Fuerzas, together with her brand new boyfriend, Hector Pedro Camarino Gomez. He called himself El Chino to go hand in hand with La China, but El Chino would find his girlfriend so violent, he would rat her out to the police. La China was a violent, bloodthirsty commander during peaceful times within Damaso cartel. Now she was a real-life monster, compared to El Chapo and El Mencho's worst assassins. Every turf fight would result in a massacre. She killed everyone on sight and left their dismembered bodies out in the open for El Grande to see what was coming for him. The police were now looking to arrest her, so she would keep moving from town to town. One day, La China sent one of her sicarios to get a new car for another journey. He arranged for a couple of vendors to deliver the car to Melissa. When they did, she killed them just to avoid paying for their car. The sicario was shocked and threatened La China to go to the police. That's when she cut off his forearms, shot him in the head, and buried him in her usual mass grave. This was her own man. El Chino saw this, and he couldn't take her violence anymore. I think it's worth stressing out that El Chino was also a sicario. He was used to violence, and he'd probably committed crimes himself, but what La China did was a little too much for him. That day, he fled and ran straight to the police. Only they could give him protection against La China and her army of mad dogs. It's unclear whether El Chino tipped the police about Melissa's location out of fear of his life or a desire for justice. It's probably the former reason. But either way, La China's massacre days were finally over. On September 20th, 2015, La China was arrested at Cabo San Lucas International Airport. She was trying to flee the state. Now she will spend the rest of her life in prison. In a strange twist, her personal Instagram account remains active. It's pretty shocking to see photos of Melissa smiling next to her family and looking like a very normal, even joyous person. This is the same woman that cut people's limbs while they were still alive and buried them in a backyard grave. It's reassuring to know that she will never walk free again. Griselda Blanco. Guys, our female narco list is topped by this brutal legend. Griselda Blanco was once known as the Black Widow and the White Powder Godmother. She partook in narcotics-fueled orgies, killed all 3 of her husbands, and died in a brutal shootout at age 69. She was born in Colombia in 1943. Not much is known about her first years at home, but Griselda was very young when she entered the criminal working world. When she was only 11, she attempted the kidnapping and ransom of a young boy from a rich family. When the family failed to pay, she shot and killed the boy. Griselda was a bad seed with a very hot temper, but the context at home might explain a few things. When she was 19 years old, she ran away from home to escape her mother's boyfriend violating her again. It's not known how many times she was a victim of this monster and just how implicated or ignorant her mother was. But clearly, Griselda grew up in a rough house, so she became even rougher. First, she settled in Medellin. That's right, Pablo Escobar's hometown. So it wasn't long before she became part of the Medellin cartel before Pablo was old enough to make it his own. Soon she would earn more money than any of Escobar's men. During the 1970s, Griselda illegally immigrated to the US and settled in New York. Then she moved to Miami, sensing the surge in white powder consumption in the area. From there, she would oversee the Medellin cartel's notorious coke smuggling. During the 1970s and 80s, white powder was trafficked more than weed, and Griselda was at the center of the terrible Miami drug war. For the first time, police officers were being gunned down in the middle of the day, and rival gangs would engage in shootouts in public places, endangering civilian lives on a daily basis.
The disregard for human life there at the scene was something that we had never seen or heard of here in South Florida.
Griselda loved killings. Bodies lined in the streets of Miami as a result of her feuds. She gathered around her a group of henchmen known as the Pistoleros. Initiation into the group was earned by killing someone and cutting off a body part as proof of the dead. Griselda was a 5-foot-tall mother of 4. Seeing her, you really wouldn't peg her for a cruel drug lord. But she had a thirst for blood, equaled by none. The height of her career, she ordered assassinations left and right, destroying enemy cartels and their claims to the white powder trade. Griselda is responsible for anywhere between 40 and 200 deaths, and some of the victims were her own lovers. Griselda murdered all 3 husbands too. The first to go was a petty forger named Carlos Trujillo after a business dispute. Then she fatally shot her second husband, Alberto Bravo, after she suspected him of cheating on her. Yep, she suspected him. She did not even have proof. And there's always divorce, but Griselda didn't seem to care for this. In 1983, she killed her last husband after he left her, but not before butchering 8 strippers who she thought were sleeping with him. And to make matters even worse, she had a German shepherd called Hitler. She was a horrible dictator, and she was proud of it. She even designed her own assassination method, the motorbike drive-by. At her career peak, Griselda was making $8 million a month. She had created a special line of lingerie, and she hid white powder in the secret sewings that women would wear past the borders. It was a new method, and it played on the fact that women were less likely to be randomly checked in airports. She even trained her women smugglers to flirt with the guards and distract them.
She encouraged the women to dress very attractively, to be flirtatious with customs agents and immigration agents.
Griselda's lifestyle was as hectic as it was outrageous. According to The Independent, the Black Widow organized drug-fueled orgies and changed her appearance dramatically almost overnight. If she felt powerful, she would look like the femme fatale. If she became paranoid about rival cartels being out to get her, she would groom for days, becoming almost scary looking. On February 17, 1985, she was arrested in her home by the DEA after a costly decade-long operation. The agent in charge was so happy that he kissed Griselda on the cheek.
Bob went directly up to Griselda and gave her a big kiss on the cheek. She demanded to know, "What is that for?" Which Bob replied, "That's because I'm so glad to see you." Because Bob had been hunting her for a decade.
She was charged with conspiring to manufacture, import, and distribute coke and sentenced to 15 years.
The fact that the homicide rate dropped dramatically after she was arrested.
By the time of her arrest, Griselda had spread nothing but pain and suffering, and now it was all coming back to her. 3 of her 4 sons were killed, and her surviving child, Michael, survived 7 assassination attempts. In 2004, Griselda was released and deported to Colombia. In 2012, age 69, Griselda was visiting a butcher shop with her pregnant daughter-in-law when 2 hired assassins jumped off their motorbikes and shot her twice in the head. Her brutal death stands as a symbol of the gruesome reality of cartel lives. Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on today's video? What are your favorite female mobsters, and did we miss any? Let us know in the comments section, and before you leave, don't forget to like and subscribe.